Hello and welcome to MalMakes. Today I'm doing a painting of Dyna Blade from Kirby Super Star Ultra. This is the full version. If you're interested in the time-lapse, you can click on the card here. Otherwise, let's get started. I've gone ahead and done a sketch, and I started by worrying about the background and getting that squared away first. And once I was happy with that, I went ahead and started to draw Dyna Blade. Now, I know it's more of an eagle or a hawk or something, but I kind of thought cardinal when I was looking at it and working on it. So I started to look at pictures of cardinals in flight and kind of like how their feathers work, and I like their little songbird legs more than like the claws of one of the bigger birds. So I kind of based it more on a cardinal, and I kind of like the flamboyancy and kind of just the drama of it. So that's kind of more about how I'm going to be drawing it when I get there, but I really want to make sure all of my background on my canvas is done first before I go on to starting to even draw this on it. I've drawn a couple lines in chalk to indicate where I need to go. I kind of drew a midline here so I know when the light color needs to end, and I had drawn in kind of the midpoint between the two colors. But because that's orange, it's going to kind of show up with my other colors. I erased it, but I still see just a touch of it, so I know where it is. Now I'm going to take my biggest brush I have and start down here with the light color and bring that up, and then I'll bring the dark color down. Because I start with the light color, it tends to work better with washing my brush out and mixing the colors, so I always start with light and work to dark when I do this. I'm starting to draw in some of the bursts here, so I started by figuring out where the middle is, and then I drew some of the radiating lines out, and now I'm just kind of drawing these long kind of spears with them. And I'm also adding a few smaller ones in, kind of maybe in the bigger areas. And they're not totally perfect, they're not totally symmetrical, I just kind of want this big burst of light. So in the corner here, I've been testing making up more of this color. Now I ran out when I did the background, I had a lot more of this than I had this. So I'm trying to make up a little bit more, and I do want to make it slightly lighter. So I tried this one color and it was too dark, and I didn't notice until it dried. Normally when I'm using golden paint, it's pretty accurate when it dries and I don't have to worry about it color shifting. When you use cheaper paints, that tends to happen a lot. But it might have been the glare because of my studio lights where I thought this was the same. Well, it did dry a bit darker and I'm not happy with it, so I mixed up this other color using a lot more yellow and white, which is fine because I do want these just slightly lighter than this orange I have here. You can definitely see the red behind these stars because this is a little bit transparent, especially when I use yellow, I noticed that. So I'm just giving it a second coat, and once I'm done with that, I'm just going to put a few small dots throughout the rest of the sky. With the sky done, I need to start filling in this part of the canvas. Now, if you go back to my sketch, you can see that it's just these clouds and these platforms. So I'm going to go ahead and mark those in with chalk pastel first, and then I'm going to start in the background and then work my way to the foreground, filling them in, whether they're clouds or the platforms, and it's all kind of the same colors as I have already. So I already have that on my palette, and I can just start to work it in and fill it in as I go forward. I was trying a few different things on my canvas about how I was going to do the clouds, and I wasn't liking how it was going, and I didn't want to keep building up layers on the canvas itself, which is fine because it is acrylic and you can do that, but I decided I would work in my sketchbook a little bit until I had it set. So in my sketchbook I put down some of the color I have here, and then I tried a few different ways of doing clouds. Now I really like how this bottom one looks because the Kirby clouds are always really round and kind of circular. So I think this is more of the technique I'm going to be using, kind of overlapping these big sphere shapes, and I'm just going to be using plain primary yellow on top of the orange. As I'm working my way towards the ground, I'm going to start to kind of make these clouds into more concise clusters as opposed to these long strips. Now these are going to look fine behind everything else, but now I need to kind of start to break them apart and make bigger clouds. Once I have the first layer down, I'm just taking a lighter yellow and kind of filling in some of the highlights of these clouds, just to give them some layers. So I kind of do the edge first, and then I kind of just blend it out into the rest of the cloud. The clouds are all filled in, and I went ahead and redraw my platforms. The next thing I would be doing would be filling those in, but first I want to get a little bit more of this color back and bring these down a little bit, just on top of the clouds a little. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of bring these down and fade them out. I filled in the tops and they're a solid color. The next thing I need to do is kind of fill in the edge. Now the edge is kind of like a 45-degree angle, or it's like kind of sliced off. So I'm going to go ahead and fill that in. I just took this color and added a bit more red to it. And then I'm just going to fade it into this original color I have on the top towards the left edge of everything. So on those edges I added a little bit more red and then some burnt umber. Now what I'm doing is I'm going to fill in the sides, and I'm using that same color I used for the top on the left here because that's the highlight. That's where the highlight's going. And I'm going to bring it all the way down to where this point is. And then I'm going to kind of just fade it into the same reddish burnt umber color here. And then it's going to go ahead and start to go back into the light, kind of this highlight color. I've been painting these sides of these mountain things and they're not really working. Like the colors are nice, but I'm starting to kind of paint on top of the ring I've already painted. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by blocking off the sides, paint the side first, then paint the ring, and then paint the top. I think that'll help me out trying to just do the layering, because I'm just painting on top of this one. I need to blend this first. So I'm just going to go ahead, tape everything off, and then keep working. So I'm taking the original color I had for the top here and putting it on the sides of each, and then I'm taking some pure primary magenta and just trying to blend them together. And sometimes I find that if I kind of do this little wiggle with my brush and then paint the direction I want it to go, it'll blend a lot nicer. And then I'm going to grab some primary magenta and kind of fill in the middle part here and blend it into what I've already done. And then I'm just going to get a little bit of burnt umber, and I didn't even clean my brush because I don't want to use pure burnt umber. I want to kind of mix it with the magenta as it is. And I may need to put a little bit more magenta on my brush, so it's kind of a mix of both. And then I'm going kind of right here in the middle and blending it left and right. You can probably see kind of how messy this mixing gets when I have to go back and forth and I have 3 colors, which is why it was working a lot better when I did this first and then kind of working my way towards the top. I was just trying some things out, but I kind of like how it's looking, so I thought I'd quick explain. Now I'm just re-putting this ring that I talked about earlier on all of these, and then I'm just repainting the top, and it's going to need a couple coats because you can definitely see the colors underneath. Then I mixed up kind of a burnt umber magenta color, which is, you can see here, and it's kind of like a darker version of the darkest color I have on there. So I'm just kind of adding that underneath all of these where the zigzags go. And it's kind of showing some of my paint through, so I may have to give that a second coat even. But I'm just going ahead and filling that in through all these zigzags. I mixed up a burnt umber and magenta mix to kind of fill in this part of all of these cone things. And then I went ahead and re-put all of the rings on the edges. Then I'm just taking the original color I had and filling back in the tops to fix what I painted over before. And you can really tell on this one, I'm gonna need a second coat because I'm still seeing all those colors underneath. While I was doing the second coat for these, for the dark part down here, I just went ahead and made it slightly more red as opposed to the burnt umber, just because I thought the burnt umber was too dark and there's not enough dark in the painting to kind of warrant that. The next thing I'm going to do is a couple of them have another bit of a ring down below them. So you can see it here on this one, there's just a touch of it here on this one, and then you can see some more over here. And it's the same colors as the cap, so I'm just going to go ahead and do that, and then as I'm doing that, there's a couple spaces I need to touch up, like this point, this point, this point, and this point. So there's just a few little places that as I do those bottom parts, I'm just going to touch up the tops too. The last thing I'm doing is just touching up some of these clouds. So I still have some of this color on my palette, and I'm just kind of fixing the edge where they overlap. And I'm just going ahead and re-tapping in some of these, and this color is a lot more transparent, so I need to add a lot more paint. But I'm just going to go ahead and do that for all of these. With all of the clouds and mountains done, it's time to go ahead and start working on my foreground space here. So I need to go ahead and redraw in this line with the chalk pastel. Now I'm going to make sure I use my T-square so everything's nice and straight. And because this doesn't sit quite to the edge, I need to move it temporarily. And then I need to make sure that I have everything covered. I don't want to be showing any blank canvas where I'd have to touch up later. So like here, I see too much. You can see there's some white, and I'd have to repaint my background. So I want to make sure that I bring the ground far enough up that I don't have to worry about that at all. So I'm just going to go ahead and mark a nice line here, and I'm using green just because I will be using green to paint it. Just going to go all the way across. And then I'm going to grab some more of my frog tape and then make a line there too, just to make sure it's set. I taped this off in preparation of doing the grass, and I thought the grass kind of hangs down and covers part of the sidewall, so I should really do the sidewall first. So I'm going to go ahead and draw myself another line to kind of differentiate what's on the top and what's on the side. I'll tape that off, and then we'll start filling in the sidewall. I've mixed up a magenta burnt sienna mix for this, and I wanted it to be kind of like a brownish red, but I don't want it to be too dark like this burnt umber was getting, because I still want it to be light enough that you can see the red, and that we can start to add the details on it next. Now I'm going to make sure I get the sides of my canvas and the bottom of it before I move on, so I'm going to give it this base layer on all those sides, and then we'll add detail. While this is upside down and I was kind of talking about painting on the edges of the canvas, I thought I'd talk about why I do it and some of the practices I use, because I don't always show it upside down because it's kind of disorienting on a video to suddenly have a canvas upside down and it being right up the rest of the video. So when I do this, I always keep a piece of plastic in the tray of my easel. I didn't do it in the beginning because I didn't realize it was going to cause trouble, but at some point it started to cause trouble. When I would flip my canvases, or even when they were right side up and I'd pick them up, they'd be stuck and they'd peel some of the paint from the easel and it gets stuck on the canvas, or it would peel off some of the paint from the canvas and keep it stuck on the easel and I'd have to fix it. And that's kind of a pain. I don't always know what color I used. Sometimes I've forgotten, or it was some random mix of colors that I just had and it wasn't something fresh out of a tube, so it's harder to mix. So I've started keeping this plastic wrap on my easel, and this is the piece that was here right before I flipped it. So you can kind of see this color that I have here, and you can see where the canvas sat on this. Now this is actually just the plastic my canvas has come wrapped in. Normally you'd throw it away, you don't really need to keep it for anything, but I slice it up into these long strips so I can put it here on my easel, so that when I flip it like this I can put a fresh piece of plastic underneath so it doesn't stick. And then if it gets paint on it like this, I'll recycle these sometimes. If it's not too bad like this one, I cut them into small squares. And then on my palette, I kind of put it over my paint to keep it wet. Now this is the same color I have here, so while it's drying, I can kind of keep it wet and not lose this color that I've mixed. I know for sure what's in it. It was this magenta and this burnt sienna that I had, and I know exactly what it looks like because I still have it. I don't have to worry about losing it or remixing it, and because I have so much for this color in particular, I can keep using it to paint this. When I start painting in the details, I have this that I can start from to make my color. Now when I wrap some paint like this, I can normally keep it for a few days. If I make sure I tuck all the edges in real tight, especially this much paint, I can keep it probably 3 or 4 days. I can also add in some of my retarder, which is a product Golden makes that keeps it from drying. Now it's not going to keep it perfectly from drying all the way, but it will keep it wet and workable for you. And if you find it's a little thick when you go back to it, you can mix some of that in and it'll kind of get it back to the consistency of regular paint. It's not going to save everything, but it is a good way to help and not lose so much paint when you're working. Now, the reason I paint on the sides of my canvas is because some people prefer to have a floating canvas where it's just hung on the wall, and that way you have a nice edge that you can show. It's kind of the picture wrapped around. Not everyone's going to frame a canvas, and I kind of like it when it's just hanging plain on a wall by itself. They do look really, really good framed, but if you don't want to deal with a frame because it is kind of tricky to install one on a canvas, then you don't have to worry about it. So that's why I've started wrapping these. I've been painting on the edge and wrapping the image around, I think almost all of my paintings except the first 2 or 3 of them. So it's been really nice to kind of have it done that way. It looks a lot more complete and professional. So I'm just going to go ahead and paint the top of this, let it dry, and then I'll flip my canvas back and start doing the details. With this dry, it's time to start blocking in the details for this wall. Now I'm just using the edge of my ruler and tracing it just to kind of give myself some nice straight edges and right angles. And then I'm going to decide where the next one goes and do the same thing. And that way I can keep all of my lines going in the exact same diagonal, and I have nice straight angles because of the ruler being square, and I can kind of just fill everything in this way. To fill in these bricks, I'm taking that base color I had and kind of painting on top of them. Now I'm starting with this one right here because it's the one that gets overlapped by everything. So I'm going to kind of basically just repaint it with my base color. And then I'm going to take some burnt umber, and I'm going to add that for the shadows. And because this one to the left sits on top of it, I'm just going to give it a nice shadow on the left, and blend that in. And then kind of give it a shadow for everything else. I do have a highlight, and basically the bricks on the left side of each of those corners is where the highlights are going to go. And I'm just going to kind of keep working from the blocks that are furthest back until I get to the blocks that are on the very, very top. I'm just going to work all the way through all of those, and I'm going to be jumping around through the entire thing. With the wall done, it's time to tape off the bottom part so I can go ahead and fill in this ground space. And I'm just going to do the same thing using this frog tape, and I'm just going to line it up from the edge and go all the way across. I mixed up a green that's actually very similar to my tape color, and I thought the tape color was good, so I tried to mix that same color up to put there. So once this dries, I'm going to have to do a second coat because you can kind of see underneath where this was, and then we'll peel off the tape and start to add some details. To do the detail for the grass, it's going to be a couple layers. Now the first layer I need to do is this darker green, and I took this green and mixed a little bit of red into it just to sort of tone it down so it's not so bright. I want the brightness to be on the layers that are closer to us than the layers that are far away. To do this detail, I'm taking some of this olive color, and then I'm doing just a few little bumps out here on this edge. And then as I start to run out of paint, I'm going to go back on the edge of it and kind of just take the paint that I have and blend it down into nothing. The next row is the original color, and I'm just doing kind of the same thing with just these little bumps that kind of go up like grass. And then I'm just blending it down into itself. For the bottom part of the grass, I went ahead and kind of drew in this wavy line, and it's going to kind of represent all of these different parts of grass that are coming down. I drew in a line first, just to make sure I didn't draw any of them too far because I only want them to go to a certain spot, so I knew when to stop when I was drawing them. Now I'm just going to take the darkest color I have up here and kind of do all of the bottoms of these with that green. Now that's going to need a second coat. You can see a lot of the red behind some of these. So once it's dry, I'll go ahead and do that before I start doing the value there. In the meantime, I'm going to take the lightest color I have, and this color isn't on the canvas yet, and I'm just going to go ahead and do some details with the medium layer and then the far away layer. The shadows of this aren't quite dark enough, so I just mixed up a darker version of this color with a little bit more red and a little bit more blue. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of on the right side here, bring in a little bit of this color. With the shadows worked in, I'm going back to my mid-tone, and I'm just giving it a little bit of a highlight here on the left of each one of these bumps. And then across the top, I'm just kind of flattening this edge back out because it's kind of like the top and then the side. So I want to make sure I don't have any of that dark color sitting above that line. Now I'm just going to do the same thing as I've done with these other two layers with the lightest color I have. And it's kind of more of a yellow-green. And I'm just going to go ahead and kind of block that in just like I've been doing. And also on the very, very edges of these, I'm just going to add a little bit of this down here. There's two things I need to do yet, and the first one is add a little bit of a shadow on the wall underneath these parts, and I can't do that yet because it's still wet and my chalk is there and I have to erase that first. So I'm going to kind of skip that for now and work on something else. And the second thing I want to do is add just a little bit of highlight to the tips of these little bits of grass. And then I also want to add some just along the very, very edge here. So I've mixed up a lighter color than the one I have down. And I'm just going to go ahead and kind of fill in little bits of highlight on the very, very tops of these, just like I did the other layers, but with a lighter color this time. And then I'm going to go along the bottom and just add a little bit in there. The last thing for the background is to fill in the shadows behind these drops of ground. And I've remixed up this color right here, which was burnt umber, with this red that I had. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of behind each of these, give it a nice shadow. With the background done, I need to go ahead and start drawing in Dyna Blade. So if we go back to my sketch, you might remember I talked about how I wanted it to look more like a songbird instead of like a hawk or an eagle. So what I'm going to do is start to draw it in with chalk pastel. I'm not going to worry about drawing in every single detail because I need to go ahead and kind of prime it with white first. If I don't do that, you'll see a lot of these other colors underneath because there is going to be some of the white here. And all the other colors, some of them are a bit more transparent than others, and I want to make sure that they're all bright. We have the whole rainbow there, and I'm not seeing like some of this reddish brown underneath something. That wouldn't look very good. So I'm going to go ahead, draw it in first with chalk, and then prime it white, and then we'll start drawing in some of the details on top of the white so I can then paint them. I've blocked in this much of Dyna Blade, and I don't really want to go any further because I'm kind of getting lost where all my feathers are on the wing, and I don't want to accidentally paint something wrong. So I decided to do it kind of feather by feather all the way down, doing the rainbow parts here where the muscle is, and then just kind of going piece by piece, drawing it, painting it all the way down so I don't accidentally paint too much, or I paint just enough. I don't have to worry about messing something up. So if we go back to my sketch, what I'm trying to figure out right now is what blue I want to use to shade the white parts of Dyna Blade. And it looks like that in the game where the blue is shaded on the white, it's not like a gray or anything. So I started to paint in some feathers here and trying to figure out which blue is going to work. But I wanted to be able to compare it to the painting and which colors are going to work really good with it. And it's really hard because I can't like put this up here and see because I have all of this paper around it. Now I could cut them out, but that's gonna kind of ruin my sketchbook, and I kind of like my sketchbook to be solid. So I decided, what can I paint on that see-through? And I thought about the plastic that I keep underneath my canvases when I paint. So I painted some feathers on there to compare the different blues I have. Now I want to use a blue straight out of the tube because then I don't have to worry about running out. I can just kind of pull it from the tube and not have to worry about mixing a custom color. Come on, stick. There we go. So I don't have to worry about mixing a custom color and running out. I can just take some out of the tube and I'm good to go. So I went ahead on this piece of plastic and I painted some feathers using the 5 different blue tubes I have. So I have a Prussian Blue, I have a Cyan, Ultramarine Blue, Cobalt, and then I have a Phthalo Blue on the right. So I can kind of compare it, and you can see some are a bit more teal and some are a bit more purple. And I kind of like both for different reasons. I think the teal is a lot more tropical and fun, but I think the purple ones kind of work a lot better with the rest of the painting. And in particular, I think the Prussian Blue hue is my favorite. It's kind of both. It's more in the middle compared to these two over here. So I think that's the one I'm gonna go with. But this is a really cool tool because I'm just using some static electricity to keep it there. I can also hold it. I can move it around. I know the tail's not going to be white, but I can kind of see what it would look like in comparison to the rest of these colors. I can move it over here and kind of see it with this wing. I can't flip it because it's wet, but I can kind of see where it would go and what it would look like in different places. So that's kind of a useful tool. I don't suggest putting it here and painting because there might be a hole or something, or you might accidentally paint too far. I just kind of put it down on my sketchbook and did it that way, and then I held it up. So that's a nice tool you can kind of add to your repertoire, and it works really good for comparing colors. I finished the first feather on each side and then the first color, so you can kind of see how I'm shading this and how the layers are working. So I'm trying to do these first and then the next thing, which is the color, and then this top one here. So next I'm going to block in the next 2 feathers in the color, because the feathers are a little bit smaller than each of these colors, and just kind of keep working that way. Block some feathers in the color, paint, block the next row in, paint, and then keep going until all the wing is done. The next thing I'm trying to figure out is what color I should use for the orange, or exactly which orange I should use. So I took some of the cadmium red and put it down in my sketchbook, and then I tried a few different things, and you can kind of see the breakdown here. So this was the cadmium red across the top, and then this next one here, this is Pyrrole orange plus white, and that was way too light. That wasn't really what I was looking for. This is plain Pyrrole in the middle, and then this is Pyrrole plus some primary yellow. And I do like how this one looks because it is similar to the game, but compared to the cadmium red, it's way too light, it's too big of a jump through the rainbow, so I think I'm going to stick with the plain Pyrrole orange for my next color. The next color with our rainbow, of course, is yellow. So in my sketchbook, I've done a couple tests. Now, yellow has a few problems. Yellow paints tend to be very transparent, and when you mix them with black, they tend to turn green. So I did a few tests with them just to make sure I was happy with what I was going to choose. I have a primary yellow. You can see it's very transparent here, and it's kind of a lemon. I want it to be a bit more orange, so I'm not going to be using primary yellow. And then up top here, you can see the primary yellow mixed with Mars black on the bottom and carbon black on the top does turn very green, so I'm definitely not using primary yellow. There are times, of course, when I like to use it because I want that lemon highlighter look, but this one is not one of them. So here in the middle, I have cadmium yellow medium, and then here on the right, I have cadmium yellow hue medium. And the difference between those is which one has pure cadmium in it and which one is synthetic. And you can see here, this is the pure cadmium here, and then this is the hue down here mixed with 2 different types of black. I think I'm going to be going with the cadmium yellow hue, just because I like the look of it better between the two. It's a bit more orange and this one's a bit more yellow. So I think I'm going to go with the cadmium hue just because of the way the color works. It looks like it works really good with the Mars black, so it's not super green. It's kind of green, but it's the best I can get with the yellow and the black. So there's a few differences between why you would want to choose a cadmium color versus a cadmium hue color. You may want the pure cadmium just because of the color. and you may want it because it's a bit more opaque than the hue. The hues tend to be a little bit more transparent. You may want the hue just because some places, some professors in college don't allow you to use pure cadmium, and definitely for the price, the cadmium hue is a lot cheaper than pure cadmium. It's expensive to have cadmium in paint, so you may want it for that reason, which is totally fine. The companies do their absolute best to make it just like the regular cadmium, but in a synthetic form with the other colors and pigments they have. So that may be a choice that you make. Don't feel bad about picking a hue. There's a lot of colors I have in a hue, like the Prussian Blue that I'm using for the white here is in a hue. So don't worry about that if you pick a color that has hue in the name. It may seem cheaper and it may be a little bit more transparent than some of the other colors than the original not hue version, but it's totally okay to use. So I'm definitely going with the hue color for the next one, so I'm going to go ahead and keep shading the yellow part with the cadmium hue. My next color is green, so I did a few tests with this. I used the same colors to make this green. It's just different ratios and different amounts of layers of paint. So I used a primary yellow and the primary cyan to make it because I don't have a good green. I have some phthalo greens, I have a Jenkins green, and I have a chromium oxide green, but none of them are quite what I'm looking for. So for this one I had to use a custom color. So all of these are primary yellow with cyan. This one has more cyan in it, and I got it all over my hand, but this is the cyan I used. And then these ones have the same amount of yellow and cyan, except this one is just one coat and it's kind of transparent because of the yellow, and this one has 2 or 3 coats, and it's more what I'm looking for. So I still have some of this, and so once I get to that green layer, I'm going to go ahead and use my primary yellow with cyan mix and do a couple layers of it. The last color is blue, and now there's going to be a lot of more of a royal blue, more on the face and the edges of the jacket. So this one I think was chosen to be more of a turquoise or teal, just to sort of be different from that, because we also get a lot of blue on these feathers. So for my next color, I tried doing a few different things. This is an ultramarine blue with yellow, and it just wasn't working with the ultramarine blue. I tried some cyan with yellow with a little bit of white, but it was still very dark, so then I tried it with more white and a little bit more cyan, and I think it looks really good that way. So this is more of the color I'm going to be using, and so I'm just going to go ahead and finish up this rainbow on the feathers. The next major thing to start filling in is everything that's red. So the head is red, the vest, the tongue, and then there's some red down here in the tail feathers, but I'm going to skip those for now just because I'm not sure how I want to do it yet. So I'm going to leave it alone, maybe try some things out in my sketchbook and go to it later. For shading the red, I used a lot of the black to bring in some of the darker shades. Now I did kind of do the edge here, and that's just because there's going to be a bit of piping on the vest, so it's going to kind of cast that shadow there, so I did it preemptively. And then I kind of shaded the head in, and there's a little bit of a highlight here on the eyebrow. So I really like how this cadmium red is working with this. And the next thing I think I'm going to work on is starting to fill in the beak and then the piping on the jacket, just because the gem here is also going to have kind of an edge. So I'll have to do the piping on the jacket before I can even do that edge. So I think I'm going to work on that next. So I'm going to start mixing up a gold color. To fill in the piping, I'm just going to use this paint marker, and this is an empty paint marker that I have. and I filled it with Golden's High Flow Titanium White. It's really highly pigmented, so it works good as a base coat, and especially when I'm doing tiny things, it's good for outlining like that. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of block in all the piping and then around the gem, and then we'll start filling that in with gold. To shade the piping, I'm going to go ahead and use that same color I have down already because it's kind of transparent with the yellow. I'm going to use more yellow for the highlights and then more red for the shadows, and the red's going to kind of create a darker orange basically. So I'm just going to go ahead and keep filling that in, and then I had done one coat of the green for the eye, and that's the same green as here, so I need to do a second one and then add some value there too. The next thing I'm working on is the beak, and with the beak I'm using cadmium red and cadmium yellow to kind of make a very, very yellowish orange color, because any of my plain yellows were just too bright. They were like too lemon colored, and I wanted them to be a little bit gold, but not gold like the piping, so it had to be a little bit different. So I'm just going to go ahead and give this a base layer first, and then do some shading with some yellow ochre and some burnt sienna. Besides the feathers, there's really only two other things to do, and that's filling in this gem in the middle of the vest, and then the feet. So for the feet, I'm using burnt sienna as my base, burnt umber, and a little bit of Mars black maybe if it's not dark enough for the shadows. And then the talons are kind of that same Prussian blue white as the feathers, so I still have some of that on my palette to do those. Before I move on to the final feathers, I want to make sure everything else is set, which pretty much leaves just this gemstone in the middle of the vest. So in my sketchbook I did some really quick rough gemstones, and they're domed, they don't have facets on them. And so I was trying out all my different blues, and you can see I've labeled them, and that's always good to do, and I've labeled all the colors I did before. And if you go back a page, I have everything else kind of labeled. Now it's not labeled 100%. Ideally, that's what you would do, is you would put all your colors in here and label how you mixed them. In case you need to redo it, you have at least what tubes of paint you used to make them. So ideally, like, I would have the top color of my sky labeled. I don't, but at least I have it here so I can try mixing something up and testing it against the paper instead of on the canvas. So that's why I like to keep my sketchbook nearby, just to test those things in case I need to. And then also I have kind of a record. In case ever I need to do this again, I know what each of my blues look like as a domed gemstone. So on the left I have cyan, and it's kind of light. I do like how the white works with it. It does have this nice like luminescent quality with it. The phthalo blue green shade is probably my favorite one out of the 5. It has a nice depth where it gets real dark with the phthalo blue. The cobalt, while I like cobalt a lot as a color, it's not really dark enough. It doesn't have this nice deep feeling like a gemstone does. The ultramarine is probably my second favorite, but I think it's too blue compared to the phthalo. I think this is kind of greenish, and I really like that about it. And then the last one is the Prussian blue, which is actually the color I had used for the feathers. And while I do like the Prussian blue, it just wasn't really working trying to do this, just because of the way the Prussian blue is interacting with the titanium white. It didn't really have this nice luminescent quality, and it's way too dark, and it's kind of hard to even tell it's blue compared to some of the other ones. So I'm going to be using phthalo blue green shade. There's a lot of different phthalo colors. In fact, there's 2 phthalo blues. There's phthalo blue green shade and phthalo blue red shade, I think, and they're totally different. So this is the one I have, and this is the one I like, so this is the one I'm going to be using for the gemstone. And my first step is going ahead and doing kind of a base layer just to make sure it's set, and I'm covering up all the white I have down. The base layer is done, so it's time to start doing the value for the stone. Now the rest of my highlights kind of hit from this top direction. Like the top of the wing is lighter, and then it's lighter over here, and then like the top of the head and the top of the beak are lighter. So that's kind of the direction of the light that I'm going. So I've mixed up some of this phthalo blue with a little bit of my titanium whites. And then if the light is kind of striking the top left part of the gem here, because it's going to be transparent, it does get this little bit of a highlight down here where it's inside of the gem. So I'm just kind of mixing this in here just to give it a nice base first, and then we'll kind of work on smoothing it out, lightening it up a little bit, and then just kind of giving it that inside transparent feeling. Once I'm happy with the gradient, this crescent moon that I've kind of filled in, I'm going to go ahead and add the surfaced highlight where it's kind of hitting the top of the stone, and I'm going to be doing that with pure titanium white. Now I'm going to kind of do a little bit of blending it in, so it's just a little blue, and then on top of that I'm going to put just a pure white dot. With that done, I need to go ahead and add all the feathers. So there's 3 sets. The first set is across the top of the head like a mohawk, and the colors and the shading are the same as the beak. It's that same yellow with the ochre and the shading I did there. Now on the back of the face, there's some feathers here behind the chin, and those are going to be the cadmium, this lighter green, and then the blue I have for this gemstone. So I'm really glad I have it in my sketchbook because it's been a little bit since I did that, and acrylic does dry out, and even though I cover my paints if I have some left, there's not a whole lot of that green. So I can go ahead and look at my sketchbook, look at the swatch, make some more, I know exactly what's in it, and then I can go ahead and figure that out and fill that in. And I'm going to be shading those just like I did the color parts of the wing here. And then for the tail, I'm going to shade it just like I did here, and I'm actually going to be using these same first 3 colors, red, orange, and yellow for the tail. It starts yellow and then goes into orange and then red towards the tips of the wings, feathers. And then after that, it's pretty much set. I might do a few minor touch-up things, but otherwise I'm really happy with how the shading's going, and I really, really, really love the colors on this painting. A couple of notes about how I'm doing these feathers. I started by priming everything with a liquid white just because it's so tiny and some of these are so pointy that the liquid white works a lot better for those. It's not as opaque as say like the heavy body, but it's a lot easier to fill in. If I really want, I can do a second coat of the liquid white, but it's working pretty good with my colors. So I primed the whole mohawk and filled it in with a beak color, a flat color, letting that dry, and then later I'll start adding the value to it like I have on the beak. As for these things, I'm kind of bouncing back and forth. I primed the first feather on each, let them dry, I kind of was working all throughout things, and then I went ahead and painted them the flat base color, primed the next one, and now as I had finished priming, they dried up so I can go ahead and start to add the value. So I'm starting down here with this tail feather, and I started with the middle one, just because everything else down here sits on top of it. So I'm just doing a little bit of shading with the Mars Black, and after that I can go ahead and go to the top feather up here, do the same shading because I have cadmium on my brush already. I can go ahead and shade that red part, and then after I shade both of those, I'll do the flat base color for the next ones that are primed, and then when they're drying with their flat base color, I'll prime the next few feathers, and I'll keep working that way, bouncing back and forth so I can keep moving, keep things on my palette wet and not let them dry out. The tail and the side cheek is done, and I actually ended up putting that back side cheek feather in. You can see just a couple of them up here. And I did do them darker just to differentiate, And you can kind of see like the difference in how light this one is, and then those ones are a lot darker. So the last thing I am doing is just filling in the mohawk with some shadows, and I'm doing it the same as I did the beak. I have the cadmium, yellow cadmium, red mix for the main color, yellow ochre for one of the shades, and then I have a darker shade with some burnt sienna. So I'm just going to go ahead and fill that in, and then we'll be done. And we're done! We have Dyna Blade from Kirby Super Star Ultra. If you're interested in this piece, you could buy a print or a poster or bid on this original canvas. There's links down below. Also, consider supporting me on Patreon. You can find out more at supportmal.com. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes of MalMakes, and I'll see you again here for another video game painting.